Hey Brian, great to chat again.
Marty, so good to be here. This is going to be fun. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we had a really good chat last time on your Mastering Diabetes Summit, and that was really interesting. And we talked a lot about protein and satiety, and then you've come out with the ProFast Diet book, which is a topic close to my heart, looking at protein in satiety and diabetes management, a topic that is really controversial and confused, and lots of too much protein, too much fat. We've gone through fearing carbs, fearing fat. Now we're fearing protein potentially, or prioritizing protein depending on who you're listening to. So it'd be good to just talk through who you are firstly, and then why you wrote the ProFast Diet. So a bit of background for people who don't know Brian. You're fairly well known out there in the low carb sphere. So
Yeah, yeah. I,
what's sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to say I focus in diabetes and low carbs, a natural fit, and I've always been drawn to more of a low carb approach. Found Dr. Bernstein years ago,
Mm.
and then stumbled upon some of the low carb events, and it's like coming home, going to those events.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a natural fit, and it works better than anything else I've done for my patients over the years.
Yeah. So you work one-on-one with patients, as well as a fairly big online presence and summits and books, and yeah.
Mhm.
So what is your day-to-day? I'm interested. What does it look like? Do you consult one-on-one most of the time, and then write all these books and do the summits in your spare time, or how does that look on a
Right,
day-to-day
right.
basis?
Well, I've got my week divided up pretty well. So I have days where I focus on writing and interviews and shooting videos and that type of thing. And I got days that are committed to client work or patient work. Even on those days, I don't do that much one-on-one. I have some dietitians that are trained in this type of work who do a lot of the coaching, and so I usually will meet with people, a few times a year, and if there's a problem,
Mm.
and then I do group education. So we do a
Mm.
class every week, and we do
Cool.
open call times several times a week where people can call in and still talk to me. But yeah, the one-on-one is usually done by the dietitians more often.
Cool. Sounds like you got your systems dialed in and your life balance better worked out than me at the moment.
Pretty
Very
well,
nice.
pretty well. It took
Yeah.
20 it took 20 years, but yeah, almost there.
Yeah, really great to share it with you. So I'll just the ProFast Diet. You sent me the manuscript, which looks a bit like this. I'll share it on the screen, which is really cool. Really enjoyed reading through it, and lots of commonalities in our approaches and our learning and our journey. I suppose over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of confusion in keto low carb world about protein and whether it raises insulin and blood sugars, and you should fear gluconeogenesis and minimize protein is a lot of the message to keep elevated ketones. So why did you get motivated to write a book prioritizing protein for people with diabetes?
Yeah, it's interesting. This program is a small sliver of what I do with my patients and clients, but it's an important part, and I think it's something that we use with our most motivated clients and patients, the people who really
Mm.
want to lose weight, need to lose weight, and who really want to burn more fat and reverse their
Mm.
diabetes, or at least make a big impact on their blood sugar to be able to minimize medications, things like that. And so there's a few different, I guess, methods of energy restricted diets that
Mm.
have been studied here in the past decade. One of them is Roy Taylor's approach over in the UK. He does the imaging, MRI imaging,
Mm.
and showed that a calorie restricted eating plan, energy restricted eating plan in the range of 5 to 7, maybe 800 calories a day,
Mm.
um, could reverse type 2 diabetes, or at least a large percentage of the study group was able to reverse their diabetes, bring their blood sugar back to normal, even revitalize beta cell function
Mm.
in as little as 8 weeks by
Yeah,
really
his work
burning
with
that
the
visceral fat. Yeah,
his work with the personal fat threshold is really
sure.
revolutionary, I think, in our understanding of diabetes and how it works, and that really it's your body fat that gets full and then overflows because your sponge, your body fat can't hold that extra energy. It all just sort of backs up into the system, into your blood stream as sugar and
Right.
or glucose and extra fat.
Yeah, we can talk more about that. Certainly, that was, I think, a
Yeah.
paper that he wrote that was sort of an interesting theory that he had, which is sort of,
Mm,
I think, proven out to be largely true, especially in certain
mm,
populations like South Asian population. But this particular diet he used was a liquid diet. It was like basically like a
mm.
metafast type of drink, and I'm not a big fan of that type of thing. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that with my patients. The other one that's been popularized is Dr. Walter Longo, who has
Mm,
done this work on fasting mimicking diet, which is a similar type of energy range, somewhere in the range of 5 to 7, 800 calories per day. He'll do it for 4 or 5 days at a time to stimulate autophagy and weight loss. But his main focus is cancer, and
mm,
he uses a low protein model, which
mm,
might have some might have some effectiveness for cancer prevention, mTOR reduction, that type of thing. But I think for metabolic health, it's really not the
mm,
best idea. So I like these two. He's also shown some studies on beta cell revitalization and diabetes reversal. So there's a lot of research, and the more I dug into it, I eventually found this protein sparing modified fast, which I know you've talked a bit about.
mm,
This
mm,
this was born out in the 70s from
mm,
two doctors who were studying parental nutrition, Dr. Bistrian and Blackburn from Harvard, and they came up with this idea of protein sparing for people who were very sick in hospitals
yeah,
on parental nutrition. And instead of giving a high glucose formula, which was sort of the standard of the day, they started pumping it with more amino acids and protein, and found that they could maintain lean body mass better that
mm,
way. And then that sort of led into the birth of the protein sparing modified fast for severely obese, morbidly obese, weight loss, and eventually for people with type 2 diabetes.
mm,
But not a lot of people know about it. It's
yeah,
used mainly by obesity medicine clinics as a prep for bariatric surgery.
yeah,
The Cleveland Clinic uses it a little bit, but it's even becoming, um, there's been a few changes in their staff, and they're starting to sort of
oh,
phase it out because a couple of people, a couple of the new leaders there aren't big fans of the aggressive nature of the program.
mm,
So it's really being phased out, and
wow,
it's the more I studied and the more I read about this, to me, it is the optimal approach for people who really want to quickly burn fat
yeah,
and reverse type 2 diabetes. So, it
yeah,
tracks along with the energy restriction that these other methods do, but it maintains lean body mass, which is, I think,
mm,
critical for people with type 2 diabetes. The last piece of it was, our friend Ted Naiman, who talks a lot about protein to energy ratio,
mm,
and I heard him say several times in a row that um, if you really want to if you really want to cure or reverse energy toxicity, then just focus on eating more protein and less energy.
yeah,
And so as I thought about that, I said, well, this is sort of the perfect eating plan to accomplish that in an aggressive, quick way. I mean, you can do it in a more moderate way as well. But if you really want to turn things around quickly, I don't see a better approach. So anyway, I felt like there was a need to really flesh out all the research, the current research, and put this in a in a usable, popularized manuscript that people can actually apply, either with their doctor under supervision or with themselves to help them make a big impact on their blood sugar and weight.
Yeah, there's also the Lyle McDonald's protein sparing modified fast, which is more geared to the bodybuilders, and they're talking about like 4.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass, and it's like that's a massive amount of protein when you look at how much that is, and it's just insane. So I suppose for it's good, I think, that you've gone, well, not everybody wants to be that hardcore bodybuilder and can't they're not preparing for a stage show. How do we reinterpret this for the normal person who is just managing diabetes, probably doesn't want to be that extreme, but let's look at a more moderate approach. And I sort of keep saying everything in nutrition in terms of weight loss and satiety is sort of on the spectrum between cheesecake, donuts, and cookies at one extreme, and then the other end it's the chicken and broccoli and very, very lean
right.
with veggies. So it's good. I think it's really good that more people are talking about that. How do you move up to that other end to prioritize protein to get the results you want? So
I think so too. Yeah.
Have you checked out Lyle's book? I mean, how
I have. I'm surprised.
How does it differ from that sort of extreme bodybuilder approach?
Right, for sure. Yeah, I should have mentioned him, and if he's watching, I apologize for not mentioning him, Lyle.
He'll be raging in the comments on YouTube, I'm sure.
For sure. Yeah, no, I actually interviewed Lyle. He's a great guy, and he's
really?
Very strongly opinionated, but he's a smart guy. He's studied his
he's
stuff.
Really wrong.
Yeah, he was one of the first ones, to bring the ketogenic diet into popularity too. But the thing is, this is one of the few strategies that I found that can be applied to somebody who's morbidly obese and who is a super lean bodybuilder who wants to cut weight for a competition. I mean, how many eating plans out there are used by those two groups of people? It's quite astounding.
But which one's the most effective for bodybuilding or morbidly obese people? And exactly, it works for both extremes, and it's just a matter of tweaking it for that situation. So I suppose that's what you tried to do in the book, which is really great.
Definitely, because you have to realize the leaner you are, the less reserves you have to burn if you're on an energy restricted diet. So your body will then start to break down your own stored body tissue, particularly muscle, lean muscle. It'll typically go through other proteins first. It's always going to be a combination, but if the research is pretty clear that if you have a fair amount of body fat, say 20% body fat or more, you're really not going to, on a protein sparing eating plan like this, you're really not going to burn your own stored muscle. You're not going to catabolize your muscle mass, your lean mass. But if you're somebody who's under 12% body fat, like some of these bodybuilders, they've got to be really careful. If they go on an energy restricted plan to cut weight, they will start to burn their own muscle tissue. So by pushing up the protein even higher, they can start to, they can prevent that for the most part. But yeah, that's not something that I think is very sustainable. I'm not sure how safe it is, and definitely not something we recommend in the book. Like
what do you think
the 4+ grams.
I mean, people think, eating too much protein must be easy, but it's not. To dial up how much protein can you really eat? And do you want to comment on why it gets hard? Why not everybody's a stage lean bodybuilder? Why does it get so hard at that point, even if you're eating as much protein as you possibly could?
Yeah, especially lean protein, because it's, it is, well, as you've talked about, it's pretty high on the satiety scale. So
Mm,
protein does produce some satiety. It stimulates GLP-1 in the gut, which,
mm,
makes us feel more full. Lean protein also does not get used all that well for energy.
mm,
So, this is one of the problems I have with, the calorie counting. And I purposely don't, I try not to use the word calorie. I talk more about energy restriction, because
mm,
I think there's just a lot of gray lines with calorie counting. If you're reading a label, those calorie counts can be off quite a bit. The calories, many of these foods, the calorie count was done, in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and those charts have just been passed along.
mm,
They burn these foods in these bomb calorimeters to
mm,
try to figure out the energy output. I think our
mm.
metabolism is very different than that, and
Yeah.
we have to take that in consideration. But the biggest thing for me is that we don't really get 4 calories of energy per gram of protein.
Mm,
I think that a lot of it gets wasted through the thermic effect of food. That could be up to 25%. And then a lot of a lot of that, the amino acids in that protein are not going into aren't going into metabolic energy
mm,
cycles. They're getting used for protein synthesis. They're getting used for amino acid, or for neurotransmitter production. They're getting
mm,
used for detoxification. Uh, they're getting used for anabolic purposes, building up of the body. So they're not available for energy. So just to say across the board, we get 4 calories per gram of protein, I think is not accurate. So anyway, sort of an aside, but that's another thing about protein. The
mm,
leaner the protein, uh, not only the more satiating it is,
mm,
um, but we're not getting that much energy from it. So
mm.
uh, it's I don't think the body is necessarily designed to crave super, massive amounts of super lean protein.
Mm, mm,
We kind of get tired of it pretty quickly if you're not,
yeah,
if you're not adding something to it, or eating fattier cuts of meat. And that's really one of the things that makes this program different from, say, a ketogenic diet or just a low carb diet, is we are trimming the fat, because
mm,
that's part of what's going to cause you to burn more stored body fat.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, and definitely once you get to a higher protein percentage, like you say, the body can't really metabolize that protein easily. You can convert it to ATP, but it's a lot of work, and your body just
Yeah,
craves all of a sudden the donuts and the
right.
everything that's energy dense. You don't want any more chicken breast or whatever you're trying to eat. I love the lean kangaroo. Um, and enjoy that. But yeah, at some point, your body just starts craving everything energy dense. And if you can avoid those foods at that point, then that's where the magic happens, and you're much more satiated per calorie by the protein.
Hmm.
So you mentioned that the balance between protein and fat. A lot of the time in low carb circles, we say that diabetes is a condition of carbohydrate intolerance. How do you describe the balance between, like, if we want to reverse our diabetes and manage blood sugars, we need to decrease dietary fat? How does that make sense? How do you explain that to people?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it is carbohydrate intolerance in the way that, when people with diabetes eat carbohydrates, typically their blood sugar goes up. So they're not tolerating those carbohydrates very well. And oftentimes that's due to some sort of insulin signaling issue. Either they're not making enough insulin, or they're insulin resistant, or there's a combination of both. So that's called relative insulin resistance.
Mm,
They're actually making plenty of insulin, but not enough to overcome
mm,
the insulin resistance. So their blood sugar starts climbing, and that's really type 2 diabetes, sort of the foundational issue at play. And there are actually various causes of insulin resistance, but one of the main ones is lipotoxicity. So our cells become sort of inundated with free fatty acids, and that actually blocks the insulin signaling cascade. So if you think about it, like insulin, often described as a key that goes into the lock that would open a door to allow glucose to get into the cell. So not every cell in the body is insulin sensitive, but most are, and there are different glucose channels. So, one of the most common on, for example, muscle cells and fat cells is called the GLUT4 channel, and that's an insulin sensitive glucose transporter. So it needs insulin to bind to its receptor. But there's actually a cascade of reactions that happens between insulin and the GLUT4 channel opening. And that's where fat gets in the way. So the free fatty acids, also what are called inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha and interleukin 1 beta, these actually block that insulin cascade in a way, interfere with it. So it's the key goes in the lock, but the channel never opens, so glucose doesn't get in the cell. So that's sort of what happens in insulin resistance most of the time, and there's various reasons for that. And we can talk more about it if we want to, but this lipotoxicity is one of the main things. So it's not necessarily fat in the diet, though. So people can overeat fat, certainly, and when, as the name says, when you combine a high glucose or a high sugar diet and high carbohydrate diet and a high fat diet, you're really asking for trouble, because there's something I know you've talked about, oxidative priority, where we tend to burn that glucose, and then the fat gets absorbed in the gut, just gets stored into the adipocytes until they can't do that anymore, and then that's our insulin levels start to rise to hold the fat in, and we become insulin resistant there in the fat cells, and then eventually in the muscle and the liver. So this idea of fat and insulin resistance, I think, gets misunderstood. There is a connection for sure, and we know that elevated free fatty acids in the blood will block insulin signaling, but it's not always dietary fat. In fact, we know that high fructose consumption, for example, can drive liver fat, which can cause the liver to dump triglycerides and even free fatty acids in the bloodstream. When we're eating high carb, high fat, sort of what's become westernized diet, we just have this, energy surplus, and that energy surplus leads to all this excess fuel floating around in our bloodstream, fat and glucose, which then ends up disrupting our ability to burn those fuels, and eventually our blood sugar goes up. So by cutting the fat out of the diet, it's not that fat is bad. Like fat is an undesirable food, but what it does is it decreases that energy surplus. It lets us start to go into a catabolic state where we're burning more fuel, burning more energy than we're actually consuming, and then we can sort of eventually get back into a normal state where we have more energy storage capacity. And that's really the key. That's what we call metabolic flexibility. When you've got more energy storage capacity, the flux is greater. So the inflow of fat in and fat out of our fat cells, glucose into glycogen storage, out of glycogen storage. When that happens, there's plenty of storage capacity, and that happens easily and effortlessly. now we're metabolically healthy and metabolically flexible.
Yeah, that's really cool. So to reverse the energy toxicity and lipotoxicity, which is your fat overfilled in your fat storage system, you need to dial back the dietary fat. It's not unlimited fat just because you don't see an increase in blood sugars or insulin in the short term from the dietary fat. You need to dial back that dietary fat to allow the body fat to be drained effectively, and then you become metabolically flexible. Your storage sponge is sort of emptied, and then you've got space to store all that fuel, so your blood sugar then comes down as your body fat comes down, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it can take a while, especially if you've already progressed to type 2 diabetes, because once that fat gets built up in the liver and in the pancreas, especially, the body doesn't necessarily prioritize the burning of that visceral fat. Now, if you can add some exercise, different forms of exercise like high intensity interval training and resistance training to build your muscle reservoir for glycogen. And you can deplete the glycogen in the liver, and you can burn the fat in the liver through exercise. That will help because your body will pull that fat, from nearby to burn it. But, when we're talking about just losing fat systemically, the subcutaneous tissue, the fat that's underneath our skin that we can kind of shake and feel, that's really where the body stores and burns fat from. That's where it takes fat to burn and puts it, if it can. So to get to that visceral fat, to get to that liver fat, that pancreatic fat that drives insulin resistance and diabetes, sometimes you have to get pretty lean. Now, I've had clients and patients who, I think there's some genetics involved here too, but I've had clients and patients who have lost, I don't know, 10% of their body weight. They're still significantly overweight, and their blood sugar has dramatically improved. I've also had clients and patients who need to get like ultra lean before their blood sugar really normalizes, especially that morning blood sugar, because that's tied into hepatic or liver insulin resistance. So if that blood sugar is hanging up, it's just doesn't seem to want to come down in the morning, that's usually due to that insulin resistance in the liver. There's probably still some stored fat there in the liver, and you might have to really push it to be able to get your body to burn that liver fat.
Yeah, definitely. And with the data-driven fasting, we tend to see, some people start to lose body fat quite quickly, but others, while they still get elevated blood sugars, it's like the body, due to oxidative priority, needs to work through that glucose first. So by delaying, and we'll talk about fasting a little bit more later, but by delaying your meals a little bit more, it enables your blood sugars to drop. And then once your blood sugars drop, you can then get on with burning the body fat. And all the time, it's that protein nutrient centric diet is critical to that factor. So does anybody need to be concerned about too much protein? I still see a lot of argy-bargy backwards and forwards, round and round about too much protein, and you'll get rabbit starvation, and you'll get ammonia toxicity. And what about if your kidneys aren't good? And when should you be concerned about too much protein, and how often do you see that in your real life clients?
Right. Yeah, no, I think it would be very, very rare. Rabbit starvation is not something we see, in this day and age. I think with the abundance of foods around us, like you mentioned earlier, if you tried to eat, 98% lean protein and tried to get up to, I don't know, above 50% of your energy intake or caloric intake from protein, I think your brain would probably drive you to the pantry to grab whatever food you possibly could. I think it'd be really hard to.
7-Eleven shops, or those foods are just abundant and so easily obtainable these days that nobody's living on a field with only lean rabbits to eat. We're living in
Right.
7-Eleven and Pizza Hut and everything on every corner. That
Yeah.
when you get to that point where your lizard brain says, "I need I need the pizza, I need the donut now," it's always available. Nobody starves you to eating too much protein.
Yeah, so most of the original research on protein sparing modified fast uses a value of about 1.5 grams per kilogram of optimal body weight or ideal body weight. That might be a good starting point for most people. I think you could probably go, quite a bit higher than that. The leaner
Mm,
you are, certainly the more protein you're going to need
mm,
to maintain your lean body mass. So,
mm,
um, the most of the research that I've seen uses a high end of about 3.5 grams per kilogram of
mm,
body weight. So, as long as you're under that, I think you're fine. I would say the only caveat would be for people, in the diabetes population, there are obviously people with kidney impairment. So
mm,
for those, actually the latest recommendations are that if you're in stage 1, 2, or 3 of kidney disease, there's no limitation on protein
mm,
at all.
mm.
Stage 4, there's sort of a mild limitation, and it's not until you get to stage 5 or sort of end stage renal disease that you need to be more careful with protein consumption. And obviously, if you're in that stage, you're on dialysis, you're working with a nephrologist very closely. So
Nephrologist.
yeah, you're probably not going to be doing a protein sparing modified fast, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I've heard Ted Naiman say, more protein is like resistance training for your kidneys, and people with more
Yeah,
eating protein build bigger, stronger, more effective, functional kidneys. So it sort of potentially staves off that end stage renal disease. So
for sure.
unless you're
I mean,
on
the
dialysis, then probably don't need to be concerned.
yeah, I
Sorry.
mean the GFR definitely goes up as you increase protein consumption. I mean, obviously you are filtering more nitrogenous waste to the kidneys, and so the that's sort of a GFR is sort of the standard. It's a calculated number based on creatinine
I
and
think
blood
the thing
urea.
to emphasize there, it's a EGFR, it's an estimated glycemic.
Estimated, right? Exactly, right.
But it's calculated based on the creatinine in your bloodstream, which
Yeah,
is a function of how much protein you're eating and how much muscle mass you're carrying. So anybody with a respectable amount of lean body mass, strength, and eating more protein than the average bear is going to have a elevated EGFR, which is going to be concerned potentially to their doctor, and they're going to say, lay off the protein. But it's an estimated number that probably no need for concern at that point.
yeah,
You talked about you're getting dark over there, mate.
yeah. I know. I'm trying to turn on some lights here.
Mood
I
lighting.
I didn't think about that. Try to put my computer on here.
Yeah. So you talked about you don't really like a liquid formula diet. There've been a lot of and people use protein powders in this. Why is nutrient density that you talk about in the book and whole foods critical to a effective protein sparing modified fast focused diet? I know the Mayo Clinic, they had a great research paper on the protein sparing modified fast, and one of the conclusions was that whole foods was critical to maintaining over the long term, and people learning how
Yeah,
to cook and prepare whole real foods that look like food. It wasn't just a shake diet that they were going to go on for 50
right.
days and then go, yeah, I didn't learn anything about the way I eat and prepare food and how I shop, and I'm just going to revert to how I ate before after this short term gimmick thing.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that are critical to maintaining weight loss, because that's always been the knock on the protein sparing modified fast or any calorie or energy restricted eating plan is that even if it does work, the results don't last, and that is
Mm,
true. For the most
mm,
part, I mean, if you look at the data, most people do gain weight back, even
mm,
protein sparing modified fast research, but there have been a few exceptions.
mm,
And so the exceptions are number one, real food. If you're
mm,
eating real food as opposed to shakes, liquid, um, liquid formulations, that type of thing, bars, soups, that kind of thing that you see sometimes in these programs. So if you're eating real food, it's going to be, number one, I think it's more satisfying. And you also learn there is a learning process. You're learning to eat. And so I find that people who do this with real food can sustain it for very long periods of time. I mean, I usually recommend like a 6 to 8 week period, and then taking a little break. But there have been people who have gone 6 months, 12 months, and longer on a sustained energy restricted diet, eating real food. So I think that's possible. I think you're also getting things from real food that are sometimes hard to quantify and put into a shake. The more we learn, and you've done an amazing job, obviously cataloging nutrients, but even that, we don't list out all the flavonoids and all the other things that come in real food that we don't necessarily get in a protein shake. And there's been a few research studies on the importance of some of these phytonutrients with glycemic control and so forth. So I'm not sure how important that is for weight loss, but certainly, if we're going to say that nutrient density is important, probably some of these non-essential or other plant compounds that we don't know that much about have some value of importance as well. So anyway, I think that's part of it. The other piece is keeping protein high. So what a lot of the early protein sparing modified fasts did is right at the end of the program, they just dropped their protein down to a standard diet, which was, more like 0.8 grams or 0.7 grams per kilo.
And it didn't work anymore.
What's that?
And it didn't work anymore.
It didn't work anymore, right? And so they upped the carbohydrates, they lowered the protein, put them back on like a 60, 20, 60, 20, 20 diet, something like that. And right, the people just gain the weight back, of course. So I think maintaining adequate, I would call it adequate, some people might call it higher levels of protein, but maintaining protein levels that are in this 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo is really important even after the weight loss, to maintain the weight loss. But yeah, I think one of the things we know that I'm not against protein powders. I think they have a place, especially for busy people. If somebody's a vegan and trying to do this, and they're trying to figure out a way to get protein in, I think there's some value to them. But you're not going to get this satiety with a protein powder that you're going to get with lean white fish or chicken breast or even steak, certainly. So it's definitely inferior. Plus it's a processed refined food. So it's always best to go with a real food, and the research backs that up, and we definitely see better results with real food.
Yeah, it's basically a pre-processed food, so your body doesn't have to spend as much energy to metabolize it into ATP if it needed to, and so the satiety value is much lower. When we looked at the satiety analysis, it wasn't just protein, it was protein and fiber, and definitely the biggest correlation to satiety is not just protein percentage, but dietary induced thermogenesis, so which is that protein and fiber together. So the less processed your pre-processed foods your diet is, the more satiety you're going to get. So the more natural basically it is, the more effort your body has to go through, and the less it's going to go, give me more of that food, I can have unlimited amounts. And you look at the Kevin Hall studies with the ultra processed food, you eat the same calories, same macros, and your body yields so much more energy from that and builds more body fat from that same amount of calories if you put that food into a bomb calorimeter. So yeah, it's really that the focus on whole foods is incredible. And I think you mentioned in the book the Last Chance diet from the 70s, which was just collagen shake, which people literally died
Yeah.
from that. And that's where Lyle McDonald focused on make sure you get your multivitamin and your fish oil if you're going to go on this extreme high protein diet. But definitely a protein focused, nutrient dense whole food diet is just a no-brainer, the best thing. But it's a big transition from what most people eat in the Western world today, when they're just addicted to convenience foods and Uber Eats and a 7-Eleven on every corner. And, very few people actually prepare their own food and buy whole food, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. Well, people want to make it easy, but honestly, eating protein and vegetables is pretty easy. I think
It's
if
pretty
you
simple.
don't have to make it complicated, it's pretty simple. Yeah. So I think if you can make it more simple and just, keep it to good quality protein, lots and lots of fibers, veggies, um, and minimize the fats for this program, at least to burn more body fat, to cut fat, and to reverse or at least improve glycemic control. I think the simpler the better.
So is there a role for supplements potentially if you can't get all whole food, or is that might be a compromise and an insurance?
Yeah, I would say it's a compromise. I think the supplement recommendations that I have in the book, I stuck largely with what was initially recommended by Doctors Bistrian and Blackburn from the original program. They
Mm,
found that there were some issues with uric acid production, and they did find an omega-3 deficiency
mm,
in some of their early studies. So they added, well, they mainly added the multivitamin and some electrolytes. Lyle
mm,
McDonald, I think, is the one ended up recommending fish oil. So I think those
mm,
three are a good idea. If you're
mm,
doing a wide spectrum of fibers, veggies, and good quality proteins, probably don't need the multivitamin as much, I would say. But
mm,
um, and you can eat salmon, on this program, so you can get omega-3s. I
mm,
do recommend wild caught salmon, which is a little bit leaner,
mm,
but you're
mm.
still getting a good bolus of omega-3 there. So you could probably do it without supplements, but those three I just recommended, um, mainly because they've sort of been included in protein sparing modified fast diets over the years for various
Yeah, yeah.
reasons.
Salmon's great for omega-3, but when you get to the leaner fish like tuna and tilapia or whatever,
Yeah.
it's lower fat and therefore lower omega-3. So it's surprising how little omega-3 some of those really lean fish sources actually have. So I suppose that's where you need to, once you get to a more ideal weight, you can maybe back off the intensity of your protein percentage to make sure you can get that omega-3 fat.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
To segue from there, you talk about a moderate, accelerated, and aggressive approach. Who do you recommend? Going hardcore aggressive versus moderate versus accelerated.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I wanted
Everybody wants
to,
fast weight loss. I want it tomorrow, Doc.
right, for
Give it
sure,
to me
for sure.
now. What do I have to do? Is that a good
Yes.
approach for everyone?
Well, I think if you're obese, certainly you've got a little bit more flexibility there because you've got more body fat storage to burn through, before you were to, would start to burn through um, you start to catabolize your own lean muscle mass. So I did it based on several things. The main thing really is body fat percentage. So if you're a little bit leaner, I generally, even though um, the rapid fat loss Lyle McDonald's program is used by very lean bodybuilders, I generally don't recommend doing this program if you're under 15% body fat.
Mm,
Just I think from a if you are going to do it, I think it's best, to have some supervision,
mm,
or, at least work with a dietitian or nutritionist or somebody who can sort of monitor you. But But anybody who's above that, I think, can do it. And then we break it down into these 3 levels. So, like uh, if you're a male, 15 to 20% body fat, you can do it, but I recommend keeping your carbs and fat a little bit higher because you don't have as much um, stored body fat. So we don't want to go into that level of energy deficiency necessarily. So we generally recommend about 40 to 50 grams of carbs, maybe a little lower would be fine. 40 to 50 grams of fat if you're already fairly lean in that 15 to 20% range. If you're in the more the 20 to 25% range, then cutting that a little bit, so more like 30 to 40 grams of each. And then if you're over 25% body fat, then I think you can be as aggressive as you want to be. Now, not everybody wants to be aggressive. You also have to look at sustainability with this. So if this, if going on, for example, 20 grams of carbs and 20 to 30 grams of fat per day is going to send you off the rails, and it's just sort of mentally impossible for you to do,
There's a risk
then
of
you
binging,
don't need to do
rebound
it.
binging, so you need to find that balance.
Right, exactly, yeah, for sure. But I think it's safe for people who have that sort of higher level of body fat. They've got plenty of body fat stores, and it is designed for people who have type 2 diabetes. So, there's not really a risk there. The other thing is medications. If you're on insulin, for example, as a type 2 diabetic, and you've got dysglycemia where your blood sugar sort of is up and down and all over the place, you definitely want to be a bit careful. Same thing with blood pressure. If you're on blood pressure medication, your insulin levels will typically drop very quickly on this program because you're in such an energy deficient state.
Yeah.
And, at your body just, once you get into that, you are
Okay.
really in a fasted state, even while you're eating. So, your
Yeah.
body starts, going into ketogenesis, and your insulin levels drop and all that. So if you're on insulin or an insulin producing medication, you definitely have to be a little bit more careful. Probably want to be supervised, but those are the 3. So we call it, level 1, 2, and 3. There's more information in the book about that, but basically it's just how aggressive you want to be with the energy restriction.
Yeah, so you talk. It's called the ProFast book. There's a fair bit about fasting as well. Why do you bother with the protein and just not fast for 2 months to get the weight off? And how long is too long for fasting?
Yeah, so I don't have anything against fasting short term. I think time restricted eating can be a really powerful strategy. That's sort of within a. Let me turn that back on. That's sort of within a. It just went dark. Give me 1 second here. That's within a 24-hour window. See if it comes back on there. Sorry, Marty. Hang on 1 second.
You've gone dark.
I've gone dark. There we go. Should be back. Put the light back on.
We're back.
So, time restricted eating, having a restricted eating window, doing either early time restricted eating where you're eating earlier in the day, and then starting your fast in the early or mid afternoon. That can be a really effective strategy for people who want to burn more fat and want to go into sort of a mild energy restriction. I think up to 24-hour fasting for most people is fine. Past that, you're in total glycogen depletion, and you are going to start to catabolize muscle tissue after that. I mean, the research is pretty clear. Not a ton. Yeah, we do release adrenaline, and there is some muscle preservation that happens, but you are going to metabolize some lean muscle, especially as you get deeper into a pure water fast. If you're talking about doing a 5, 8, 10-day water fast, as you shift into ketosis, you are going to preserve glucose, you are going to preserve protein, but you're still burning some lean body mass. So the whole purpose of the protein sparing modified fast is to keep your protein levels, your protein consumption, your amino acids that are coming into your body adequate, so you don't dip into your lean body mass.
Because once you lose your lean body mass, your metabolic rate slows, and all you want to do at the end of the fast is eat, and probably the last thing you want to do is go on the chicken breast and broccoli, and you're just going to rebuild other things other than your lean body mass at that point. So yeah, it becomes really hard when you fast and then don't rebuild what you need to. So I think the protein sparing modified fast sort of balances the need for fasting and protein and finds that nice sweet spot between those two extremes.
Yeah, and you're still going to upregulate autophagy. Not as much. You're not going to get as much downregulation of mTOR and upregulation of an autophagy as you would on a water fast or on a low protein fast, but you're still upregulating autophagy. That's the kind of the recycling of cellular debris and proteins and things like that. So that's still happening on a calorie restricted diet, on an energy restricted diet. So you're still getting those benefits. And you will get some slowing of the metabolic rate on any energy restricted eating program, but it's temporary on a protein sparing modified fast, because what you said, you're not losing lean body mass. When you lose lean body mass, so if you were to fast for 10 or 14 days, or even just slash calories while maintaining your sort of the standard American or Western diet macros. So let's say your protein consumption comes way down because you've taken your total food consumption way down, but you're eating the same thing. What's happening there is, as you mentioned, now we're catabolizing or breaking down lean body mass. Our metabolic rate is slowing down temporarily and permanently, because once you start eating normally again, you're going to get a little bump in metabolic rate, but now you've lost all that muscle. And so you've lost, all that ability to burn glucose. You've lost that glycogen storage capacity. You've lost that, that component of your resting metabolic rate. So I think sometimes there's confusion. If I cut my calories or I cut my energy, isn't my metabolism going to slow down? It will, for sure, but it'll be temporary if you keep your protein consumption high. Once you start eating again, so when we transition people out of this, we keep the protein, up pretty high, just as high as it is during the plan. We start to raise fat consumption levels, carbs a little bit, and then the metabolic rate just comes right back up. So within a few days. So you don't see that weight gain that you would see if you just went from a 1,000-calorie standard American diet to all of a sudden going back and eating 2,500 to 3,000 calories again. On a slower metabolism, you're just going to gain a bunch of weight. That's the yo-yo dieting thing that happens when people try to just cut calories.
When you lose your lean body mass, your body goes into emergency rebound mode to build back that muscle, because if you lose too much muscle, you're dead, basically. So you need to just prioritize eating anything and everything you can to rebuild that muscle at that point. We talk about tracking not just your weight, but your waist and your body fat, so you make sure you're not losing that lean body mass, because you might not be losing a lot of weight, but if you're losing body fat and gaining lean mass, because a lot of people, as they start to eat more protein, they actually build lean mass, especially if they come from a very low base. It's
Absolutely.
incredible. Just, no resistance training, no extra exercise, but as they go from 60 grams to 120 grams of protein a day, they build this lean body mass and feel energized and fantastic. So, are they probably the top three markers you'd track? You talk about a lot of different markers you could track if you really wanted to analyze it, but I mean, weight, body fat, your waist, are they the critical things? What else would you track?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like that waist to height ratio, or waist to stature ratio. I think that is a good marker. It tracks pretty well with metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. So, we know that people who have bigger girth compared to their height will oftentimes, it equates with visceral fat storage, which equates to metabolic syndrome. So I think you want to keep that at 0.5 or less. So you divide your, your girth, your waist by your height, and it should be half. It should be 0.5 or less. Probably better to be like 0.45 or less, but certainly under 0.5. And so there's some interesting studies actually on South Asian populations and how they have this increased sort of genetic propensity to store fat viscerally as opposed to subcutaneously, and so that kind of factors into what has become known as personal fat threshold, is this what's sometimes called in the literature this adipose overflow, where the subcutaneous tissues get filled up, and genetically some people don't store as much fat there, so they start storing it in their organs and in their muscles, which leads to metabolic issues. So I think and particularly in South Asian populations, it's the lack of storing adipose in the legs. Actually, that's the big one. So, so when you measure the waist, yes, you're getting some of the subcutaneous tissue there also, but you can really tell that someone is more that apple shape and storing more fat in that area than in their, for example, in their hips and thighs and lower body, which is more common in Caucasian populations, and even some Asian populations, like in China, they don't seem to have as much of that. It really seems to be South Asia. So so that's interesting. But yeah, I think going back to the measurements, the weight to height ratio, weight in general. I mean, if you're overweight, just tracking that in conjunction with your waist to height ratio, I think is important. And yeah, if you have the ability to test body fat. I'm not a big fan of like bioimpedance scales or calipers, but a lot of gyms now have these bod pods, where you can get in and do a do a calculation that tracks pretty well with hydrostatic weighing, and get a pretty accurate picture of body fat percentage.
Yeah, so to circle back on the South Asian population, they may need to get to a lower waist to height ratio than a Caucasian population to be below their personal fat threshold to see waking blood sugars that are in the healthy range, maybe below 100 milligrams per deciliter or 5.6 millimoles. So yeah, to find your personal fat threshold, you just need to keep losing weight until your waking blood glucose is at a healthy level, and that's your personal fat threshold. Really, it's and that's your weight at your personal fat threshold.
Yeah, I like how simple you've made that, and really it is looking at the fat.
Yeah. So what sort of symptoms should people be prepared for when they start to lose weight on this sort of approach?
Can you see me, Marty? Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I should have put it on airplane. I got a call and kind of knocked me off there for a second. So I missed that a little bit. Did you say what kind of symptoms?
Yeah, what sort of symptoms, what side effects should people be prepared for as they start to lose weight rapidly on a protein sparing modified fast or your ProFast program?
Yeah, so I think signs and symptoms. As far as symptoms go, which is um signs and symptoms are a little different. We kind of clump
Mm,
them together, but signs are things we can measure. Symptoms are things that we feel. So
mm,
symptoms would be, the first couple of days are going to be difficult. There's habitual eating patterns that um, we actually talk in the book a little bit about the different types of hunger. And
mm,
so there's habitual hunger, there's this hedonic hunger, which
mm,
is sort of just this desire to eat. It's not
mm,
really true hunger. I think as long as you keep your protein and um, nutrient density high, you're really not going to get truly hungry because you're getting plenty of nutrients, you're getting plenty of nutrition, but you are going to feel like you want to eat something
mm,
else because
mm.
you're just not used to it. So I would say be prepared for a few days of that. I usually find that fades within 3 to 4 days. And
Yep.
anybody who's done any long-term fasting, this is true for fasting as well. Usually you lose that sort of ravenous hunger that you feel after a couple of days. It's not as pronounced as trying to do like a water fast, because you are eating. So
Mm,
but the other thing is there is a little bit of boredom with this eating plan, so you've kind of got to get your head wrapped around that to begin with. If you're used to eating just a wide variety of foods and snacking on nuts and eating rich sauces with your meats and dumping olive oil on your salad and things like that, you're going to have to get used to a little bit more of a restricted diet. So there is that sort of mental component also.
Food is
Um,
not entertainment anymore. It's,
yeah,
nutrition and
exactly.
nourishing your body and giving it
Right.
what it needs.
And just, I always encourage people to remember that this is not meant to be a lifestyle strategy. You're not doing a protein sparing modified fast for the rest of your life. This is a therapeutic eating plan to help you get out of energy toxicity, out of
Mm,
energy surplus, get into a state where you're more metabolically healthy, metabolically flexible, and then you can start to add some more energy.
yeah. So to try and sorry, go on.
The biggest
You might.
signs.
Yep, gotcha.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep, gotcha.
Okay, so some of the biggest signs are going to be lower blood sugar and lower blood pressure. So, and also you're going to dump fluid early in the process too.
Mm,
So you're going to be going to the bathroom a lot more. You're going to notice that you're not as puffy, and your blood sugar is going to come down. So this is why if you're on insulin, on medications, you got to be a little bit cautious.
mm,
If you're on blood pressure medication, your blood pressure can drop. It's not going to drop too low naturally, but if you're taking blood pressure medication, that could suppress it to a hypotensive state or a hypoglycemic state in the case of blood sugar if you're not careful.
mm. Yeah, cool. So to wrap it up,
Yeah.
what should people avoid if they want to follow this approach, and what foods should they prioritize? What's the like top five on each extreme? What would you avoid, and what would you prioritize?
Yeah, so to me, this is taking. I'll just use it because I know you've talked a lot about it. It's taking like the PE diet, the Ted Naiman diet, sort of to the extreme. So
Mm,
it's eating um, foods that are really high on the protein to energy ratio, scale. So you're eating lots of lean proteins, so things like chicken breast, white fish, seafood. As I mentioned, you can eat salmon, but you want to try to choose leaner salmon, like wild caught salmon tends to be a little bit leaner. You
mm,
can eat steak or even hamburger, but you want it to be,
The leaner
at the high end of the lean spectrum. Certainly, yeah. Bison would be fine. Wild game would be good. You can eat pretty much any bird, as long as you're eating the leaner parts of the bird. Pork is tough. You could do pork loin, but I wouldn't do, sort of fattier cuts of pork. You can eat eggs, but we do recommend limiting the yolk. So like half, one yolk per 2 eggs seems to keep the PE ratio pretty good. So those types of things, and then lots of fibrous, low energy, high nutrient density vegetables, are great. So all your leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower, salad greens, even, bell peppers and tomatoes and all that. Those are all fine. You're not getting a huge energy yield from those vegetables. Probably want to be careful or avoid starchy veggies, nuts and seeds because of the fat content. We have to limit or avoid completely. And, certainly grains. Most dairy products you want to eliminate unless it's a sort of low-fat Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, something like that. That would be fine. The higher protein, lower fat dairy products. So it takes a little bit of adjustment if you're used to eating sort of a low-carb, more keto style diet, because you are purposely going for leaner meats. You are purposely going, for lower fat foods, and that seems almost sacrilegious for people coming from the keto and low carb community. But
I went through that process. Once you
just
believe
remember,
that fat is a free food because it doesn't raise insulin, it's like you believe that, and your brain said, "I love those foods. This is the best way of eating," but it's not working for me. But to dial back the dietary fat is like, it's a real unlearning process. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then when you get into the maintenance phase, as you come out of it, whether that's after 6 or 8 weeks, or whether that's at when you reach your ultimate goals, your fasting blood sugar comes down to under 100, or at least into the normal range, or you've lost the weight that you want to lose. Then you can start bringing back in more fat. I still don't recommend adding fats for no reason. So we don't recommend dumping, refined oils onto our foods, just to increase the fat. But you can certainly bring back in, fattier cuts of meat, hamburger that's, more normal ratio, 70-30 or 80-20. And you don't have to be fearful of fat. I think once you've built metabolic flexibility, you have a larger fat depot, you've got greater fat flux in and out of the store, the fat storage, then you have a greater capacity to eat fat without it causing problems.
Yeah, cool. Hey, this has been really awesome. Looking forward to. I've read the book and it's really great. When does it come out? That's what everybody's wanting to know right now. And how can they get it?
Yeah, so it'll be out in late May or early June, and you can just check out theprofastdiet.com.
Cool.
I'll get you some information as it comes a little bit closer. That website's not up yet, so if you're watching this, anytime before May, probably don't go there quite yet, but keep it in the back of your mind. And I'd love to get the feedback from your community, because you have an incredible army of well-educated, smart, and committed people who know their stuff, and I love watching the comments on some of your posts, and the material that you put out is literally second to none. I mean, really, the best information out there. So I appreciate you and your community for sure.
Yeah, and I hear you need some really good recipe books that are nutrient dense and whole food to go with the ProFast diet. So yeah, we'll keep talking about that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Looking at designing
Well,
the
I apologize
medium
for the
aggressive
definitely.
approaches.
Yeah, your recipes are fantastic. So the PE recipes and protein sparing modified fast recipes and any of the nutrient dense, more energy restricted recipes are perfect. So great
Yeah, yeah,
resource.
really align really well. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really cool to chat and great to interrogate you this time. And you've definitely said all the right things and everything I wanted to hear. I really enjoyed the chat. So it's great to continue the friendship and look forward to continuing that in the future. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, sorry about the video quality. I know the sun went down on our conversation here, so I hope it wasn't too distracting for everybody watching.
That's good. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll catch you later. Thanks. Bye.